So I had a completely different rant planned for today, and you will definitely get that rant sometime soon, but this is pretty time sensitive, so I just wanted to sit down and do kind of a raw vlog. As many of you know, on Friday, November 25th, the world lost an amazing revolutionary, Fidel Castro. I wanted to give my perspective on everything because he is a very controversial figure. I will state right now that I am very pro-Cuban Revolution. I am very pro-Castro. That doesn't mean that I am 100% in solidarity with everything that he has ever done. I have traveled to Cuba 3 times now. I was born and raised here in Central Florida. I lived here most of my life before I moved to New York, to New York City for 5 years. And it has really, really changed my mind, changed my mindset. Moving to New York City was single-handedly the best decision I've ever made in my life. I have had so many opportunities from moving to New York, and traveling to Cuba with the Venceremos Brigade is one of them. So I kind of wanted to give a little bit of backstory about my history with Cuba. Living here in Florida, it was always in my consciousness that I was supposed to hate Cuba and everything it stood for. I didn't know anything about Fidel Castro or the Cuban Revolution. I didn't even know why I was supposed to hate them. So actually in 2012, when I was out in Los Angeles with Occupy LA, we had a person come to us, representative from Pastors for Peace, and they were trying to recruit people to go with them to Cuba that year. And unfortunately, because of the situation I was in, I was homeless, at that time. I was very intrigued, but I didn't have any money, so I wasn't able to participate in that trip. And when I got back to New York, a friend of mine, it was actually a friend of a friend, had been to Cuba with the Venceremos Brigade before, and he was telling me about it. And he said, yeah, you should apply, you should go. And so I went to one of the information sessions, and I got an application. At that point, I was working full-time, so I was able to save the money to be able to go. The Venceremos Brigade I will talk about a little bit because that is who I've gone with. So their history is that the VB is the Venceremos Brigade. The VB is the oldest solidarity organization with Cuba in the world. It was the very first solidarity brigade to go after the triumph of the revolution. The brigade went for the first year in 1969, which was 10 years after the triumph of the revolution in 1959. And they were mostly students, but it was a lot of people. The first few years, close to 9,000 people were able to go to Cuba and cut sugarcane. What started as Fidel had made an announcement that all Cubans would basically put their jobs on hold, and everybody was to cut sugarcane for that year. So the students and other people here in the United States that were in solidarity with the Cuban Revolution got together and said, what can we do? We can help out. Let's get a group together. Let's go down there. And let's, take over these jobs that they will be abandoning to go to the field. And Fidel said that is a really good idea, but instead of you taking over these jobs, come with us and help us in the sugarcane fields. So that was how the VB got started. So just to go back to kind of my backstory, so in 2013, this was the first year that I went to Cuba. I was homeless at the time. So I'd been living on the streets of New York. To get to Cuba, to see all of the things, all of the social aspects of the country that have, there's free healthcare, there's free education through the university level, there is no homelessness in Cuba, and there is still a struggle, that doesn't, there oftentimes are, 2-3 generations of of a family living in one house. There are still things that need to be looked at, to be changed, and Cubans are working on this. They understand this. It doesn't go past them. Cubans are very informed people, very highly educated, and it was such a struggle for me internally to see an entire country of 11 million people and no one was homeless. And knowing that after 2 weeks that I had to go back to New York City and live on the street. It is a very impactful visit, that very first visit, and every visit afterwards too. I've had 2 more visits since then, in 2014 and 15, and you just continue to learn more and more. But that first initial impact that you have is incredible. It's something you'll never forget. Okay, so just to break down a little bit, kind of the history between the United States and Cuba. So I won't go into the history of the revolution. I will leave some links below that I feel are very educational. I really encourage you to do more research on that. So I will just start with January 1st, 1959. The US-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista flees Cuba, and there is a victory of the Cuban Revolution, which is known as the triumph of the revolution. Several years later, in 1961, the US restricts travel to Cuba via passport controls. You can't go directly from the United States to Cuba anymore. You would have to go through Canada or Mexico or another country. So in response to that, African-American journalist William Worthy challenges this control and wins in 1964. In the process of him trying to challenge that, in 1963, the United States says, okay, so we won't restrict it via passport controls. You're free to go to Cuba, but now we're going to throw it over to the US Treasury, and you can't spend any money in Cuba. Obviously, if you travel somewhere, you're going to spend money in one way or another, whether or not it's on the airline or the ship to get there, or the transportation, or the food, the accommodations. You're going to spend money, and they know that. That's the point. 1977, President Jimmy Carter lifts these restrictions very, very temporarily. He lifts them in 1977, and then just a few years later, in 1982, Ronald Reagan reimposes the travel ban. So in 1992, the Cuba Democracy Bill, which is also the Torricelli Bill, passed by Congress, which further restricts travel. It is also the first year that Pastors for Peace has their inaugural trip to Cuba, and they are still going up until present day. In 1996, the Helms-Burton bill tightens the travel restrictions, and it gives Congress the only power to eliminate them. So that's where we see ourselves right now, is that President Obama does not technically have the authority to eliminate the travel ban. Only Congress can do that. And obviously, up until now, Congress has refused. So that's why Barack Obama can do several things, which is what he's done with saying you have to fit under these 12 restrictions, but they're basically not even really checked anymore. So essentially, we almost have free travel to Cuba, but not technically. In 1999, there are 5 Cuban men who are sent to Miami. Up until this point, there had been dozens of terrorist plots. Some were successful, some were not. So these men went to South Florida in order to kind of join these terrorist groups that were plotting against Cuba. Most of them were Cuban exiles who had fled Cuba after the revolution. They found these terrorist organizations that they went to the FBI with proof that these terrorist organizations were going to commit more terrorist acts against Cuba. And they said, see, here's the proof, like, what are you going to do about it? And instead of the FBI arresting the people who were going to commit terrorism, they arrested these 5 Cuban men for attempting to commit espionage. Didn't even convict them of committing espionage, just an attempt to commit espionage. I'll leave some links below so you can check out their story a little bit more. In 2013, I believe, Renee was released. In 2014, February 2014, I believe, Fernando Gonzalez was released, who we actually got to meet when we were on our trip in 2014. All right, so let's talk about the recent changes. On December 17th, 2014, both President Barack Obama and President Raul Castro basically, told both of our countries and the world that they were going to start working towards normalizing relations with each other. The diplomatic relations had not taken place with these two countries since the very early 1960s. So this was, a really big deal. The thing is, if you recognize the media and how they speak, and this is especially true with politicians and the president, who obviously does not write his own speeches, things are worded very carefully. So if you don't understand how to decode what it is that they're saying, on the surface it looks like a really amazing thing. Great. The presidents and United States and Cuba are going to renew relations. This whole thing is over. We're going to be able to travel to Cuba. Everything's going to be great. But that's not what it is. What President Obama was not saying on any terms that they're sorry for what they've done, that they are remorseful about it and they're going to change and they want sovereignty for the Cuban people. No, what President Obama was saying is, this tactic has not worked. We still have the same target. We still have the same end game, which is eliminating socialism in Cuba and bringing back capitalism and bringing back a US-backed dictator or president. If you listen to the words that he says it almost, it's like hiding something in plain sight. It's so frustrating. It just really pisses me off. Every time I watch the video, I'll leave the link of that below as well so you can watch that. Just really pay attention to what he says. They're still going to give $20 million a year to USAID and all of these other organizations to try to covertly overthrow socialism in Cuba and, bring back what it was that Cuba used to be, which was a colonized nation. Because the US is still salty that Fidel and everybody else raised up and fought against US imperialism and capitalism. So travel has changed a bit, but you're still required to fit into one of the 12 categories, which is not difficult. Anybody traveling to Cuba can obviously fit into one of these categories. I'll leave a list in the description below of the 12 categories that you're supposed to fit into, but the travel ban is still in place. You're still technically not allowed to travel to Cuba freely like you can almost any other country if you're a US citizen, without fitting in one of these categories. Another thing that hasn't changed, the US blockade is still in place. It has been in place since the 1960s, and the US media loves to call it an embargo, and that's what most people say. They say an embargo, but my first year in Cuba, it was explained to me that it's not an embargo, it's a blockade. An embargo would be the US saying, we're not going to do business with you, but we don't care if anybody else does. But instead it's a blockade because the US is saying, we're not doing business with you, and the rest of the world also cannot do business with you. And if they do, then we're going to fine them. Just like they fined the German Commerce Bank $1 billion in December 2014. Deutsche Bank was fined $258 million in November of 2015. The list goes on and on and on. If you Google it, you can see all of these banks that have been fined millions, even billions of dollars for doing business with countries like Cuba, Iran, Syria. All right, so I mention all of this history in order to talk about Fidel and what his legacy is and what it is to me, what it is to millions of people worldwide. If you're in the United States, specifically if you're in South Florida or in Florida in general, you're going to see a lot of people that are happy and celebrating his death. These are the people that I talked about earlier. These are also their descendants who were in that elite class. And I'm not saying everybody. There have been people to leave Cuba and come to the United States solely for economic purposes. This I cannot and will not condemn. I understand it because I understand what it's like for me to go to Cuba and to see free healthcare, to see free education, to see no homelessness, to see community gardens feeding local communities and to feeding local schools. To see no advertisements whatsoever, to not be sold anything. If you're in Havana, of course, you're gonna have like any tourist town, people, trying to sell things or whatever. But as far as advertisements go, no advertisements. There are billboards that have their history. So for me to come and to see all of this, to me, without living there, it seems like a society that I would really like to be part of, that I really want to live in. But the grass is always greener on the other side, So I don't fault these Cubans that came for economic purposes to the United States. The people who fled because they were in the elite and they didn't want to redistribute their wealth, they didn't want to give up their business, to be nationalized. These are the people that I have a problem with. These are the people that piss me off, because these are just like the 1%, the greedy bastards in the United States who are not willing, who have way more than they could ever need and than they could ever spend in one lifetime, and yet they're not willing to help out and redistribute the wealth and have a different system. These people piss me the fuck off, and I do not have any sympathy for them. So that being said, you're going to see in most Western, United States mainstream media, you're going to see the basic celebration of the death of Fidel Castro. But I challenge you to look at what the rest of the world is saying, how the rest of the world is feeling. Because right now the rest of the world is mourning. Cuba has been, under Fidel, has been in solidarity with so many different countries throughout the world. In 2010, they sent medical doctors and personnel to Haiti after the earthquake to help out there. They've sent military to Angola to fight South American apartheid. They sent medical personnel and doctors to West Africa to fight the Ebola virus. Constantly, presidents and people in different countries, they have, Cuba has educated hundreds of thousands of people worldwide that have come to Cuba for their education. They have the Latin American School of Medicine, which is known as ELAM, which educates not only Cuban doctors, but doctors from around the world, even the United States, for free or a very, very small fee. Going to medical school in the United States will set you back hundreds of thousands of dollars. But if you qualify, if you are a person, specifically a person of color, and or a person that is financially in need, and you're accepted into the program, you can go study medicine in Cuba for free. And the only requirement that they have is that you go back to your community and you serve there. Just some of the things, I'm just going to list some of the positive effects that have happened after the triumph of the revolution. So I mentioned free healthcare, free education for everyone, all the way through the university level. They have all types of medications that can help people. There's a diabetes medication that allows for limbs to not be amputated. Here in the United States, if you have diabetes and it's a very severe case, you may lose an arm or a leg. But in Cuba, they have this medication that allows that not to occur. They have eliminated the HIV transmission completely from mother to child. They have a lower infant mortality rate than the United States. They have gender equality. They are close to 50% of their national parliament is made up of women. If you look at our CEOs and our presidents, we still haven't had a female president. All of these roles, a lot of them are still held by white men, white heterosexual men. Not all of them. It's getting a little bit better, but Cuba is light years ahead of us in gender equality. They did a literacy campaign in 1961, which I still want to do a whole nother video about. They raised their literacy rate to 99%, and they've kept it there. I used to volunteer for an adult literacy league here in the United States, and there is a huge percentage of our population that cannot read or write. That means you can't read road signs, you can't read menus. It's very difficult to function in life when you always are dependent on somebody to tell you what something says. You can't even sign your name. Before the literacy campaign in Cuba, people were having to use their thumbprint or their fingerprint. Speaking of gender equality, they actually is gender transition in Cuba, the surgery is fully subsidized by the government. You don't have to pay for it. Cuba has had greatest solidarity with Black America, with people of color in the United States. When Fidel came here to give a speech at the UN, he was having struggles with the hotel that he was staying at in Manhattan. So Malcolm X invited him up to Harlem, and he came and stayed at the Hotel Teresa, which is now a corrections building. There's a lot of office space and stuff like that. It's no longer a hotel, but I've been there. I've got to be in that building, in that space where he hung out of the window, where Fidel hung out of the window, and Harlemites were on the ground and waving to him, and it was just a huge amount of solidarity. Not just that one particular action, but many actions throughout the years. Cuba has a very solid solidarity with Palestine. They recognize their struggle. They recognize the occupation and the terrorism being committed by Israel, and they are very much against it. There have been so many accomplishments, and there have been things that have failed. And I personally, from my trips to Cuba, from listening to my friends that live in Cuba tell me their stories, from hearing the stories of people that I've met while I'm there, from seeing things with my own eyes, I really believe that the good outweighs the bad. And the bad needs to be criticized, it needs to be analyzed, it needs to be changed. Cuba and a lot of Latin America and a lot of the world, even the United States, is very machismo, is very misogynistic. And things are getting better, but they still have a long way to go. We still live in a patriarchy, but their gender equality in Cuba, for the exact same job, a woman and a man make the exact same amount of money. Their maternity leave and paternity leave is just, I had never heard of that before. I had never heard of a mother being able to take 6 months off to a year after having a child and guaranteed her job when she came back. And that after a certain amount of time, if the father wanted to take paternity leave, he could take it and they could switch. And I forget the exact amount of money, but they're still being paid for that maternity leave. There's a portion of it that I think it's at 100%, and then after a certain amount of time, it goes down to like 60% or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but that blew my mind. I had never heard of that before. In the United States, I think women get 2-3 weeks, something like that. And after birth, that's a trauma. It's like a good thing. It's a beautiful thing, but it's still a traumatic experience that you have to recover from. And then you have to come back to work. The United States has so much to learn from Cuba. So much. And that's why they don't want you traveling there. That was the whole purpose behind it. Not because they think that, you'll be exposed to something bad, because they think that you'll be exposed to something good. They think, and they know, because that is what tends to happen with most people, is that when they travel to Cuba and they understand and they learn about its history and its culture and its struggles, they go, holy shit, why haven't we been doing that? Why can't we get gender equality? Why can't we get free healthcare, free education? The United States is the richest country on the planet. It has the access to the most resources, to the most money. It has the wealthiest people that live inside this country. But yet we're still struggling. And Cubans work hella hard. Farmers, oh my God, they work incredible hours. It's hard work. It's stressful. It's difficult. It's not an easy life. It's not a utopia in Cuba. But they have had over half a century blockade against them. One last thing that I want to talk about. When I finish my videos, I typically say, I leave you with revolutionary love. Revolutionary love is different than a regular type of love. Revolutionary love is saying, I love you unconditionally. And if something is happening to you that is not affecting me, I'm going to fight like hell to make it right for you. I'm going to fight for your rights. When I see injustice anywhere, I'm fighting against it. That's revolutionary love. That's what Cuba is about. That's what Fidel was about. Revolutionary love. Revolutionary love is not perfect. It doesn't not make mistakes, but it's always there. It's not abandoning someone you love because they said or did something that you were against. It's having those difficult conversations. It's being present. It's learning. It's listening. That's what revolutionary love is. So as always, I leave you, just like Cuba, just like Fidel, with revolutionary love.